Dan Andrews has announced he's resigning. He's the 48th Premier of Victoria. He's been Premier since December of 2014. As of 5 p.m. tomorrow, that will be no more. Let's get some reaction from one of the senior Liberal figures from at a federal level from Victoria. That's Dan Tehan. He's the Shadow Immigration Minister. Dan Tehan, how will the premiership of Daniel Andrews be remembered?
I think he'll be remembered as a very good politician, very good at politics. But I think, sadly, over time, his legacy is going to be one in which he made the state of Victoria poorer and he made Victorians poorer. And I'll give you a couple of examples, Kieran. We're going to face a very serious fire danger this summer. Now, Dan Andrews, one of the first things he did as Premier was basically take on, bully and dismantle the volunteer CFA, Country Fire Authority, in Victoria. They are desperately out hunting now for volunteers for this fire season. And that was all because Dan Andrews backed the United Firefighters Union in their dispute with the volunteers. You look at the road network in Victoria, it's crumbling before our eyes, and that's because of a serious lack of investment, especially over the last 2, 3, 4 years, because the state's debt has accumulated that it now adds up to the debts of Queensland, New South Wales and Tasmania combined. These are the legacies that Dan Andrews leaves this state of Victoria, and while we wish him and his family well, the sad reality is it's Victorians who are going to have to pick up the pieces of his 9 years in charge of this state.
As you know better than anyone, he had a thumping win last November at the state election. Does this departure mean that the Liberals at the state level are back in the game? And if so, how important is it for your colleagues in Victoria to get their act together and to be united?
Well, that's the key. It's unity. It's unity of the team. It's unity of purpose in making sure that they're providing a real alternative to the Victorian people, and that unity of purpose in making sure that it's Liberal values and Liberal policies that they present at the next election. So they have a real opportunity now to do that, and it's going to be up to them. And what it requires is, as you know, is hard work. There's no substitute for hard work when it comes to politics, when it comes to being the alternative government in a state or nationally. And if they do that work, they now have a real opportunity. But unifying is the absolute key criteria, and that's up to them. They can do it. If they want to be the next government of the state of Victoria, and we need them to be, then they've got to commit to unifying and commit to that unity of purpose.
It's also, we talk about a chance for your side of politics to reset, but it's going to be a reset for Labor. For any party, when such a massive figure like Andrews has been in that state, and for that party, that government, they also have to build the profile of their successor, because, correct me if I'm wrong, the name recognition would be nowhere near the current incumbent.
You're absolutely right. And not only that, they haven't been allowed to develop under Dan Andrews. He very much was a one ruler sort of operator. He wasn't a team. He wasn't someone who brought the team in around him. It was him. He controlled everything. He dictated everything. He was very much like a dictator in many ways. And so therefore that successor, whoever it is, really hasn't had the opportunity to be able to promote themselves and what they bring. And so I think this is going to be one of the real issues that whoever follows Dan Andrews will face. But it's not just that, it's having to try and rebuild and repair what he's done to the state of Victoria. We've got debt now, net debt, which is nearly $200 billion in this state. We have a hospital system which is crumbling. We have every major road project is is basically running behind time and over budget. Your country road network is deteriorating. Your schools, they're not building schools in the huge growth suburbs out of Melbourne. I mean, there's such a huge task to follow Dan Andrews because of what he's done to our state, and sadly, I actually think it will require a change of government to be able to fix all the issues, because whoever replaces Dan Andrews from the Labor side is going to be caught between trying to honour what he's done and then trying to fix it. And I think that's going to be an impossible task. And I would make this point as well, and I think it's a really important point. Dan Andrews and Anthony Albanese were close mates, and I think Anthony Albanese in many ways is trying to follow the Dan Andrews playbook, and I really worry for what that means for our nation. And I hope that Anthony Albanese will take a different track, because if he doesn't, after Anthony Albanese finishes, we'll be poorer as a nation and poorer as Australian people, and that's not what we want as a nation, and especially at this time.
Dan Tehan, appreciate your time on this breaking news on the departure of Dan Andrews. Thanks.
Pleasure, Kieran.